Hey guys, in today's video I want to reveal a problem on my forehand that I'm working on. See, the beautiful thing about tennis is that you can always get better. This is what can keep us on the court and make tennis truly a lifetime sport. I made a video recently about Roger Federer where I talked about how hard of a worker he was throughout his career, how he improved his game, and not only his technique but also his mental attitude towards tennis. And this is something that's quite inspiring, quite frankly. If somebody like Roger Federer can continuously work on getting better and is not satisfied with the level that he has, this is an inspiration to all of us to always try to be the best tennis player that we can be. So recently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts, I posted a video of my one-handed backhand. And this video did well on Instagram. I got close to 600,000 views. And I basically titled the video, "What's Wrong with My One-Handed Backhand?" And I got a lot of responses, and I've made a reveal video, a long form video on YouTube that you guys can check out. So naturally I made a similar video with my forehand where I basically hit against the target on the wall for 30 seconds. And I captioned this video, "What is wrong with my forehand?" And now you can imagine the amount of tips that I received. There was a lot, and I'm gonna go through them in a minute. But I wanna just tell you guys that I'm not doing this to troll the people online. There are actually problems on my strokes, no doubt about it. I'm not by any means hitting perfect shots. Like I said, I'm always continuing to work on my technique and improve it to the best technique that it can possibly be. So when I make these type of videos, there are truly problems in the strokes. But unfortunately, when it comes to the forehand, people have such misconceptions of what a good forehand is that this was quite a fascinating post, I've got to tell you. The ideas that people have in their heads of what a good forehand is are shocking. And there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of myths, and this can quite frankly hurt a lot of players because most of these people that are commenting, if not all of them, are at the recreational level and they have a lot of work left to do on all their shots, but especially their forehand. And if these ideas are circling around in their head, they're going to have a very difficult time improving in the game of tennis in general, but especially improving this so complex shot, which is the forehand. And one unfortunate thing about the social media era regarding tennis technique is that people have the wrong ideas in their head of what a forehand should look like. And when they look at a player's forehand, the one thing that they leave out is context. The only thing that they're concerned with is what a forehand looks like. In other words, optics. They ignore context, and context is the most important thing when we look at strokes. And when we take a look at the vast majority of slow motion footage that's available on the internet, it's mostly recorded from the side. And when we look at a professional stroke from the side, the so important context is completely missing. We don't know if the stroke went in. We don't know the intention of the player. So we could easily draw false conclusions from a terrible stroke. Because yes, even the best players in the world will sometimes miss-hit their shots and miss them way out. But we don't have that important context when we look at a stroke from the side. So the other thing that people, including coaches of course, are concerned with are the optics of a stroke. The context is missing. Let me tell you a story about my dad, who was a great coach. I grew up in the town of Split, Croatia, where my dad was one of the head coaches at the tennis club Split. And my dad had a big position where he was the captain of the junior national team in Yugoslavia. It wasn't Croatia back then, it was still Yugoslavia. And on his team was Monica Seles, one of the greatest juniors in the history of tennis, possibly one of the greatest female tennis players that's ever graced the tennis court. Now, for you guys that don't know, Monica Seles had a two-handed forehand, very unorthodox, and her main coach was her dad, Karol Seles, rest in peace. And my dad told me these stories where so many coaches were trying to get Monica to switch to a one-handed forehand. But thankfully, Karol did not listen to any of the coaches. He understood the context of what is happening. Think about it logically. Monica was by far the greatest junior player in the world, and she shot onto the professional tour faster than any other player in history. She started beating the GOAT, Steffi Graf. And one of her best shots, maybe not one of her best shots, the best shot was her forehand. So we're literally talking about possibly the best forehand in the world. But the coaches that were trying to switch Monica from a two-handed forehand to a one-handed forehand did not have the context in mind when looking at her forehand. All they cared about were the optics. And I'm going to transition to my forehand, and don't confuse this with me equating my forehand to Monica Seles. My forehand is nowhere near the elite level. My forehand is a high-level forehand. If you ever ask anybody who's played against me, they will tell you Nick has a great serve and a great forehand, and the way you're going to beat Nick, you're going to try to get him on the run. But if he's controlling the point, he's going to put you in a lot of trouble with his serve, and his forehand and his backhand is pretty good too. I have not heard one single person in all these years that I've been playing high-level tennis say that I have a horrible forehand. But once I got on social media and started posting videos of my forehand, of course, we're talking about optics, the way my forehand looks. People in droves, I get this on a daily basis, started saying how horrendous my forehand is. So let's talk about the video that I posted of me hitting forehands on the wall. And I was at a coffee shop with my daughter when I posted this. And for you guys that don't know, I used to train my daughter for 6 years on a daily basis, and we used to go to the wall a lot. So my daughter knows how difficult it is to keep the ball in play on the wall. But I wasn't just hitting forehands against the wall. I set up a relatively small target, a rectangular shaped target that I was aiming for. And in this clip, I hit 18 forehands, and 17 out of 18 went into the target. Now my daughter watched this video and she's like, "Oh my God, Dad, I cannot believe you got every single one in." Because I've done this drill with her and she knows that it's very hard to get even 2, 3, 4 in a row. Never mind getting almost 18 in a row, 17 out of 18. So she recognized this as something amazing. But when we're talking about optics versus context, there was not a single person out of the hundreds of comments that I received on this forehand video that pointed out the context. The people don't realize how difficult it is to get the forehand that's struck very hard into a very small target consistently. This can only work if the forehand is fundamentally sound. If you indeed have technical flaws on the forehand, there's absolutely no way you're going to have a precision that's that accurate in conjunction with a lot of power. And me reading these comments to you guys is very valuable, because this is going to prove all the myths that are out there on the forehand, all the previous videos that I made on the forehand. And I'm going to point out a certain video that regards a certain comment. But it's just amazing how many myths are floating around when it comes to the forehand, possibly more than any other shot in tennis. So of course we have the trolls. We're going to say that everything was wrong on the forehand. I'm not really concerned with that. But this commenter says, all in your forehand is wrong. Your foot, your arms, they must help the ball forward. So I made a video about when in tennis to move forward. And it's one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to the forehand, the fact that we should move forward on the forehand. See, at the high level, the vast majority of forehands, I would guess it at 90%, are struck open stance. And what happens in an open stance forehand and a closed stance forehand, to some degree, depending on the circumstance a player finds himself in. But what takes place on an open stance forehand is a circular swim path. So that makes absolutely no sense to go forward on a circular swim path. We're going to be rotating the torso, and naturally the weight is going to move from the dominant side to the non-dominant side. There's no forward movement. The only time we're going to move forward on the forehand, if we are moving forward in a way that's related to the incoming ball, for example, on an approach shot or on a shorter ball. Then yes, we would most of the time step up with our non-dominant foot and we would be moving forward through the shot. But mind you, even here, it would still be a rotational swing. So this is something that a lot of people are confused with, because they think that in order to get the ball to go forward, the body must go forward. Remember, all ground strokes in tennis are circular, and it makes absolutely no sense for the body to go forward, because what must the body do? It must always accommodate the swing path. So this commenter said, no coil and no energy from the ground up into the legs, hips, hand motion, hitting point, etc. So again, this person is confused what the kinetic chain is all about. If you want to know what the kinetic chain is on the forehand, you can check out a video on my website that goes into extreme detail of what the kinetic chain is on the forehand. But I also have a video on YouTube you can watch for free titled The Kinetic Chain. You can see that the forehand does not start from the ground up. Now, don't misunderstand this thinking that the legs are not important. Of course, the legs are the most important thing. We have to be in a correct position. We have to have the balance and the stability to execute the shot. No doubt about it. But the forehand starts with your eyes. And then it goes into your hands, and then it goes into your shoulders, into your entire torso, then the hips, and then the legs at the very end. That's how the kinetic chain works on the forehand. It's not from the ground up, it's from the top down. And I'm possibly in the next few months going to release another video explaining a little bit more in detail how the kinetic chain works on the forehand. Now, this person said that I don't have a coil and I don't have the loading position. I have a optimal loading position. My upper body is slightly down. I'm loading my legs. I have a nice wide base. My body is optimally loaded to strike a good forehand. So when we're talking about utilizing power sources, if you copied of what I do on my forehand, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And it turns out that the professional players that you see on TV, they load the forehand in a very similar way. Okay, the next commenter says, looks like your backswing is too big and the face is opening up a bit on the takeback. The racket should stay on the right side of the body throughout the swing. Never get behind you. Madison Keys is a good example of what not to do on the forehand side. So this is another example of people not understanding the quality of some of the forehands on the professional tour. For example, Madison Keys, who literally has one of the best forehands in the world. A forehand that has made her millions of dollars. A forehand that everyone playing tennis should want to have. That's how good Madison Keys' forehand is. But because it doesn't look like Federer's forehand or Alcaraz's forehand or Nadal's forehand, people perceive it to be wrong. Now, I made many videos describing the difference between an ATP forehand and a WTA forehand, and it is absolutely not wrong, even for a male player, to have a larger backswing. This is something that's quite complex to understand, and I highly advise that you watch all my videos where I explain the difficulty of switching to a different backswing. Your backswing should come natural. When we're talking about my backswing, I'm naturally not the strongest guy, and I need a little bit more room so that my racket can pick up more momentum. If I put my racket on the side like this, like Federer, I would not be able to get any power. So because I'm not as athletically gifted as some other players, I need a little bit more room back here to get more momentum on my forehand and get more power. Is my forehand a WTA forehand? No, it is not. My racket does not go on the opposite side of my body, and if you take a close look at some of the ATP players currently playing in the top 100, you're going to see all different types of backswings. Not everybody goes on this side. There are players, for example, Djokovic or Wawrinka, who take the racket a little bit further back where the strings are pointing towards the back fence. So this is not a wrong backswing by any means. No wrist supination. I know you dislike intentional next-gen wristing like a windshield wiper, but there is no reason not to allow the wrist joint to participate in the kinetic chain for increased topspin. So there's so many things here in this comment. First of all, I don't dislike the next-gen forehand. I have absolutely no problem with the next-gen forehand, and there's really no next-gen forehand. There are a few players who have a certain take-back style where the racket does have a little bit more movement. If you want to know in more detail what this type of backswing is, you can check out my video on the next-gen forehand. And by the way, there were players back in the 80s hitting a next-gen forehand. So this is nothing new. It's just a little different style in the preparation, which results in more movement with the racket. Now, when it comes to wrist movement and topspin, I just released a video that came out on Tuesday where I talk about the role of the wrist on the forehand. There's absolutely no wrist usage on the forehand, not on TFO, not on Alcaraz, none of these newer guys who are doing well on tour now, none of them use the wrist. If you take a close look at slow motion footage, you'll see that the tip of the racket is towards this side shortly after contact, which means that they're not wristing the ball. The wrist does not have anything to do with topspin unless we're talking about very specific circumstances like emergency situations. But in 99% of the times when the forehand is struck, the wrist is passive. And when it comes to my forehand, I can hit with topspin. Naturally, when I hit my forehand very hard, I have a little bit more of a WTA style topspin forehand. It's a flat topspin forehand. Again, there's a video that I made on this topic, flat topspin versus heavy topspin. You can take a look where I describe in great detail what the difference is between the two. So I have the capability of making topspin on my forehand, no doubt about it. It's never super heavy like what you see on the tour. Naturally, it's a little bit more of a flat topspin forehand. And when I hit my forehand the hardest, my genetic predispositions make it so that my forehand becomes very flat. So this person writes, you're catching the racket before the follow-through finishes. Your right elbow also looks to be too close to your body when making contact. The elbow is also bent on the shot as opposed to having a straight arm when striking the ball. Another myth, another misconception that you must hit the forehand with a straight arm. And also people are so confused of knowing what the correct elbow position is. See, where your elbow is has nothing to do with making proper contact on the forehand. These are genetics. This is style. There's going to be players that have a bent arm. There's players with a straight arm. There's players with an extreme bent arm, like a Sloane Stephens who won US Open with an arm like this. Serena Williams. Iga Swiatek, the best player on tour right now, has a elbow position that's very close to the body. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with having the elbow close to the body. My elbow is fairly close to the body. It's not like the WTA. There's a good distance between the elbow and my torso on the vast majority of my forehand. So there's absolutely no problem with that. The reason why I hit my forehand like this, it's just basic genetics. I've always done it that way. If I try to straighten out my arm, I can't do it anyway. I can do it in the prep phase, but the forehand moves so fast throughout the contact zone that I end up with a bent arm forehand anyway. So this is a message to all you guys who are trying to fix your forehand by straightening it. You won't be able to do it anyways. You're obsessing about optics, about style, and this is only going to cause harm to your tennis game. Gosh, your grip, of course. Grip is way too extreme. I think when you'll change your grip, that's just your typical day-to-day forehand. From what I've seen in your videos are nice, by the way, just not a fan of your technique. Listen, you don't have to be a fan of my technique. You can be a fan of the fundamentals of the game, which I possess. But if you're a fan of my videos, you know that I don't teach anybody's style. I teach the fundamentals and I allow my players to develop their own style. So you will never hear me instruct anyone to hit any shot in tennis exactly like I hit it, because this is my style that works for me. It's not going to work for anybody else. But what you need to concern yourself with are the fundamentals, not only on the forehand, but on all the other shots in tennis. But let's talk about my grip. See, a lot of people are of the false belief that I have an extreme grip. I don't. I have a semi-Western forehand grip. And the reason why it looks the way it looks, because my wrist is extended through the entirety of the stroke, which has to do with a wrist injury that I had in juniors. I made a video on this topic where I explain in great detail why my wrist is the way it is. That's why it might look stiff at times. And no, it doesn't mean that I don't have a lag. I have a lag like any other high-level player. My wrist is not completely locked. It's still fluid. It's still mobile. But the wrist doesn't change positions, for example, like on Federer, where it goes from a straight position into a bent position. This is a thing that's far more visible. My wrist is in this extended position through the entirety of the prep phase, and then when it goes into the lag, it actually goes back a little bit further. And the reason why you might think that I have an extreme grip because you're looking at my wrist position, but in fact, my grip is not extreme at all. It is a semi-Western forehand grip. And now I'm going to get into the actual problems I do have on my forehand, things that I'm currently working on. And this person got it right. It's more flat compared to modern forehand. It's only half right because it gets a little bit complex. A modern forehand is not necessarily always hit with heavy topspin. You can hit a flat topspin forehand and still have a modern forehand. For example, what you see on the WTA Tour, but also from some ATP players. It is also true that a completely flat forehand doesn't exist in modern tennis. So this is a true statement. And yes, my forehand is very flat, but like I said, I can also hit with a lot of topspin. And therein is my biggest problem, that because of my athletic deficiencies that are now increased with my age, I find myself more and more bailing out of the points and trying to end the points too quickly and kind of slapping the ball Jelena Ostapenko style, who, by the way, has a phenomenal forehand. Won the French Open, and many people perceive her forehand to be completely wrong because it's a little bit tight to the body. But again, you have to understand the context. She won the French Open and blew everybody off the court with her forehand. And no, she didn't disappear off the map after that. She's continued to have a great career, a top 20 player and even a top 10 player at some moments in time after that French Open victory. So I sometimes hit my forehand a little bit like Jelena Ostapenko when I'm tired, when I don't want to move, when my knee hurts, when my ankle hurts. I just don't want to be in a rally and I just hit very hard and go for the outright winner. And when you play like that, if you have really good timing and really good footwork, you can pull it off. But it's also a high risk game where you're going to make a ton of mistakes. So technically, it's not necessarily a wrong way to play. I want you to understand that. But it is a more low percentage way to play if you're playing a very aggressive game style. If you're pushing the ball around, maybe 70-80% power level, this can work quite well. But if you're going to completely unload on the shot, it is of course much better if you're applying topspin. And that is exactly what I'm currently working on. I'm working on developing more topspin, and my forehand has actually gotten a little bit better over the last 4 years or so because I have been working hard on it. I find that the Topspin Pro, which is a great tool, helps tremendously with visualizing the correct swing path. It has helped me a lot. And if you're interested in getting one of these, click the link in my description. But what I'm working on is getting a more vertical swing path. This is what I do a lot of the times when I play. But like I said, sometimes my finish is not the greatest. Therein lies the problem, is that not only do I not put enough spin on the ball a lot of times, but also sometimes my finish gets kind of lost somewhere in here. I don't finish my forehand all the way. This is something that's happening to me with age because I'm not in the greatest shape anymore like I used to be. I get tired, especially in the Florida heat. And when I'm tired, I feel like my body is not accommodating the swing path, and often my stroke interrupts somewhere around here. And it's not a forehand that's supported by the entire body. So this is something that I'm actively working on. I'm trying to finish the forehand as much as I can. I'm trying to have a full torso rotation. I'm trying to get the racket to go as far back as possible. I'm trying to get my elbow to come through. And I'm really trying to avoid getting the rackets lost somewhere in here in the front of my shot where my chest is pointing forward. It does happen quite a bit, and it is by far the biggest problem on my forehand. And one important thing to remember about technique in general, but especially when we're talking about forehand technique, is that even a fundamentally sound forehand, or let's say an elite level forehand like a Alcaraz, Nadal, Djokovic, or Federer, will still produce mistakes because mistakes stem from several factors. Mistakes can stem from wrong shot selection, bad footwork, or bad setup. It could stem from poor intensity, an overall negative mental mindset. So it's not all about technique. And this is something that I continue to work with. When it comes to my forehand, now that I'm getting older, my footwork and my movement is not as good as it used to be, obviously. So there's a lot more mistakes that I'm committing, especially when I'm being pushed in defensive situations. So this is something that I can definitely improve. I can try to keep my fitness up to par. I can try to improve my stamina so I don't get tired so fast. So independent of the technical things that I'm working on, I'm always striving to improve other factors that don't have anything to do with technique, which will in turn improve my forehand as well. And for you guys at the recreational level, it's the same thing. You want to improve all aspects of your tennis game, which will in turn improve all your shots, but especially your forehand. But often, in your case, it's actually the technique that's lacking. There are fundamental flaws in your forehand, and this is going to be your priority. You have to fix the fundamentals first before you worry about the other things. And this is what I'm going to help you with. I'm going to continue to post many forehand videos where I give valuable tips that are going to improve the fundamental elements of your forehand, while at the same time you will be able to develop your own style. Just make sure that you never confuse style with fundamentals.